You already know what you should do when the alarm goes off. You have known for months, possibly years. And yet every morning, in the space between the sound and your response, something happens that you cannot fully explain. You negotiate, you calculate, you construct a small, airtight argument for why today is the exception, and then you lose. Not to exhaustion, not to illness. You lose to a thought you never questioned. That is the problem this video is about. Not your morning routine, not the alarm time, not the temperature of the room, or the quality of your sleep. The problem is that you have been treating a philosophical failure as a logistical one, and no amount of optimization will fix a crack that runs that deep. There is a specific mechanism responsible for this. It was documented 2,000 years ago by a man who ran an empire, fought wars, managed plagues, and buried children. He wrote about it not in a published treatise but in private notes he never intended anyone to read. And what he wrote was not motivational, it was surgical. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what happens in the first 30 seconds after your alarm sounds, why your brain is physiologically positioned to fail at that moment, and what the Stoics built as the structural counter to that failure. 3. Practices. Ancient design. Neurologically sound. The loop is already open. Stay with it. Every person who has ever struggled with mornings has told themselves some version of the same story. The story is that they are tired, that they worked hard yesterday, that the body needs rest, that 5 more minutes will not cost anything. And on the surface, the story is not entirely false. The body does need rest. Work is genuinely exhausting. 5 minutes in isolation costs almost nothing. The story is technically defensible. That is precisely why it is so destructive. You are not fighting a lie. You are fighting a reasonable-sounding truth that has been promoted to a position of authority it was never supposed to hold. Roy Baumeister, a social psychologist at Florida State University, ran a series of experiments in the late 1990s that became foundational to how we understand human self-control. In the most cited version, participants were brought into a room that smelled of freshly baked chocolate chip cookies. On the table were 2 bowls, one containing the cookies, one containing radishes. Half the participants were told to eat only from the radish bowl. The other half could eat freely. Both groups were then given an unsolvable geometry puzzle and timed for persistence. The radish group, those who had already exercised self-restraint against the cookies, gave up on the puzzle significantly faster. Not because they were less intelligent or less motivated at the start of the experiment, but because the act of restraint had depleted something. Baumeister called it ego depletion, the hypothesis that willpower operates like a muscle, and like a muscle, it fatigues with use. The implications for your morning are not subtle. You wake up, the alarm sounds. In the first moments of consciousness, your prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for deliberate decision-making, is operating at reduced capacity after sleep. It has not yet been flooded with the neurochemicals that sharpen executive function. You are, in the most literal neurological sense, at your weakest decision-making point of the entire day. This is when you ask yourself whether to get up. This is when you debate it. And this is when you reliably lose, because you have chosen to fight the hardest battle of your day with the fewest available resources, and then blamed yourself for the outcome. What Baumeister was documenting without knowing it was exactly what Epictetus called Synkatathesis, the act of assent, the moment the mind grants authority to an impression and allows it to direct behavior. In Discourses the 2nd of 18, Epictetus writes that the primary task of a philosopher is not to perform great acts, but to govern his assents, to catch the impression before it becomes a command, to notice that a thought has arrived, and to exercise judgment about whether to follow it. The modern researcher mapped the depletion of this capacity in a laboratory. The Stoic slave-turned-philosopher mapped its structure in a lecture hall in Nicopolis. They were describing the same event from opposite ends of 2,000 years. This is the root of your morning problem. It is not that you are lazy. The category of laziness does not explain the phenomenon accurately, and imprecise diagnoses produce imprecise remedies. The accurate diagnosis is this: You are surrendering assent to an impression at the moment of your maximum neurological vulnerability, and you are doing so without noticing that assent is a choice. The impression arrives, I am tired, 5 more minutes, and your mind, depleted and only partially awake, simply follows it, not through weakness of character, through the absence of a trained structure that could have caught it. Marcus Aurelius understood this with a clarity that reads, across the centuries, like a quiet accusation. In Meditations V.1, he wrote a passage that is worth reading slowly. He asked himself why he lay in bed when the work was there to be done. He noted that he had not been born to lie in warmth under blankets. He then made the observation that animals, plants, ants, spiders, and bees all proceed toward their function without debate. They do not argue with their nature. The question he posed to himself and to everyone who has ever read that passage in the 2,000 years since was this: is warmth more pleasant than doing the work you were made for? And he answered it himself. But that is how pleasure deceives us. What he was naming was not a moral failing. He was naming a structural problem in how the mind relates to comfort. The impression of warmth is immediately present. The value of the work is abstract and deferred. An untrained mind, measuring only what it can feel right now, will always prefer the immediate and sensory over the distant and meaningful. This is not a character flaw. This is the default architecture of human cognition, and the Stoics did not moralize about it. They built tools to correct it. The first tool is Prohairesis, which Epictetus placed at the absolute center of Stoic philosophy. The word is often translated as will or choice, but those translations flatten something essential. Prohairesis is more precisely the capacity to choose the orientation of one's will, not just to decide, but to decide how one decides. It is the faculty by which a human being relates to every impression, every circumstance, every temptation toward comfort. In Discourses 1:1, Epictetus states that Zeus has given us one thing, and only one thing, that cannot be compelled, restrained, or overridden by any external force: our Prohairesis, not our health, not our reputation, not our comfort, our orientation, the direction of our will. And this is the point that cuts. If Prohairesis cannot be compelled by any external force, then the only way you remain in bed is if you choose to, not passively, not accidentally. You choose it by granting assent to an impression without examining it. This is the philosophical cost of undisciplined mornings that no productivity framework will ever name, because productivity frameworks are not designed to tell you hard truths about your own agency. The cost is not the lost hour. The cost is that every morning you surrender assent without examination. You practice with perfect consistency the habit of allowing impressions to govern your will. And habits of mind, as Epictetus noted in Discourses 2:18, with a precision that has still not been improved upon, become character, not quickly, but inevitably. Ask yourself this honestly. When you lie back down after the first alarm, what are you actually training? Not your body, not your sleep cycle. You are training the response pattern between impression and action. You are building, one morning at a time, a neural groove in which comfort defeats intention as a matter of reflex. The issue is not this morning. The issue is what this morning is making you into. And if that is uncomfortable, it should be. Epictetus did not write the Discourses to make his students feel better about themselves. He wrote them to make his students see themselves accurately, because he understood that a clear and honest view of one's own condition is the only possible starting point for anything that deserves to be called change. Here is the hardest Stoic truth this video will give you. You do not have a discipline problem. You have an assent problem. And an assent problem cannot be solved by an earlier alarm, a colder room, a louder ringtone, or a more elaborate tracking system. It can only be solved by understanding, in exact mechanical terms, what happens between the impression and the action, and then training that gap with deliberate and daily practice, not inspiration, training. Marcus Aurelius did not overcome his mornings because he was an emperor or because he had exceptional willpower. He overcame his mornings because he trained, every day, the capacity to examine what his mind was doing before he followed it. Meditations is not a journal of virtuous thoughts. It is a training log. He was practicing, in writing, the act of catching his own mind in the act of reasoning poorly and correcting it before it became behavior. That is the model. Not willpower, not motivation. Examine assent, practice daily, until it becomes structural. The first practice is called Prosoche, the morning examination of impressions. Before you interact with any external stimulus, the phone, the news, the demands of other people, you conduct a brief, precise inventory of the day's anticipated impressions. You name, in explicit terms, the moments you already know will test your assent. If the morning alarm is one of them, you rehearse the response the night before, not as motivation, as mechanical preparation. You are preloading the examined response so that at the moment of neurological vulnerability, the trained pattern has less distance to travel than the unexamined one. Marcus Aurelius practiced this in the opening passages of Meditations V. He prepared each morning for encounters with difficult, ungrateful, and obstructing people, not to complain about them, but to have already decided how he would respond. Apply the same structure to the alarm. At night, before sleep, state clearly and aloud, "Tomorrow, when the alarm sounds, I will rise. Not because I feel like it, because I have already decided. The decision is made." The morning is only execution. The second practice is Epictetus, the pause before assent. This is the single most mechanically important practice in this video, because it operates precisely at the point of failure. In the moment after the alarm sounds and before you have moved, there is a window brief, fragile, and decisive, in which the impression has arrived but assent has not yet been granted. Epictetus is the trained discipline of pausing in that window and refusing to grant assent automatically. Epictetus describes this in Enchiridion 20. We are disturbed not by events, but by the judgments we form about events. The alarm is not disturbing. The judgment, "I am too tired, the bed is too warm, 5 minutes will not hurt," is disturbing. Prosoche is the practice of holding that judgment up to examination before acting on it. In practical terms, when the alarm sounds, before any thought, you sit up. Not because you have decided to have a good day, not because you are motivated, because you have trained the physical act of sitting up to precede the cognitive act of deliberating. You remove the deliberation by making the first physical movement automatic. The body moves, the mind follows. This is not a trick. It is the correct application of Stoic assent theory to the mechanics of neurological vulnerability. The third practice is Seneca's evening self-audit, drawn from On Anger 3:36. Each evening, before sleep, you conduct a brief and unsentimental review of the day's assents. Not a gratitude list, not a celebration of wins, a precise accounting. Where did I grant assent without examination? Where did an impression govern my behavior that I intended to govern myself? Where did I practice the discipline I committed to, and where did I fail it? Seneca writes that the mind becomes better for being examined, and that the person who never scrutinizes their own behavior has no reliable mechanism for improving it. This audit takes 4 minutes. It is not therapeutic. It is diagnostic. You are building a feedback loop between intention and behavior, and you are doing it at the end of the day so that Prosoche the following morning is informed by accurate data, not by optimism. These 3 practices, morning examination, pause before assent, evening audit, form a closed system. They address the moment of failure directly. At the neurological level where Baumeister's research located the vulnerability, and with the philosophical precision that 2,000 years of Stoic scholarship has made available to anyone willing to use it. They require no equipment, no application, no subscription, no optimal conditions. They require only the decision to treat your own mind as an object worthy of the same rigorous attention you would give to any problem you actually intended to solve. The viewer who watched this video looking for a morning routine tip and arrived here has traveled considerably further than they planned. That is appropriate. The mornings were never the problem. They were the symptom. What you have encountered in this video is the structure of a philosophical tradition that treated human consciousness as a precision instrument that required calibration, not inspiration. Marcus Aurelius said it with a directness that has survived translation and 2 millennia intact. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. The morning is not a performance. It is not a test of your identity. It is the first ascent of the day. Everything you are is practiced. And practice begins with the first movement you make or fail to make when the alarm sounds and the warm dark makes its argument and you, for one decisive second, choose who you are training yourself to become. If this channel earns a place in your intellectual practice, return. There is more to examine.